Everyone tell us. And this is, I guess, it's me discussing the tier list. So if you guys saw about, I want to say almost 2 weeks ago, I made a post on Patreon and I said that I felt really bad because Riot's patches, there's almost no changes happening. And sometimes when no changes happen, I just don't make a new tier list. And the reason is because the only thing that would end up changing is the background. Like this blue would just become green or gold or red or something like that, but there wouldn't actually be changes to the champions. So a couple of things. One, a lot of these patches, you guys will see the Reddit threads, and the Reddit threads will talk about the changes that happen to the patches. And sometimes a champion's win rate might go up 1% or 2%. Now, a champion's win rate going up 1 or 2% or something, because, patch to patch or something like that, there's a lot of things that go into it. If you watch the podcast with me and Max, one of the things that I've always been really interested in is monitoring champion win rates patch to patch, regardless of whether they've had any changes inside of the patch notes, Riot balance changes, etc., right? Or monitoring the champion that got changed in that patch, had a spike, and then seeing what happens to them over the course of several patches. And then through that, you can get a more detailed idea of, variance and all these types of things. So with the current tier list and why, the changes that are going on, let me just pull up really quickly patch 13.7 and I'll pull up, patch 13.7. So we take a look at patch 13.7, we take a look at the nerfs, and let me explain why some of the changes just don't matter. So Annie losing, now this affects the Annie Emax first build, is what this affects, which is mostly Annie support. Is this a nerf that would make me feel like you should stop playing Annie, or that she's not gonna be the power pick that she actually just is? No, it's not. This is not going to impact why you should play Annie, because some people do seem to forget that the tier list serves as two functions for everything that's below like the high MMR. It serves as both what I think are the best champions that you can play, while also simultaneously improving, and the champions that are likely to bring you the most success if you actually commit to educational resources on these types of champions, and if you actually play them, grind them out, etc., rather than just picking up a random champion, flavor of the month champion, etc., and then playing a little bit. So like Annie ends up getting nerfed, right? Alistar, would a change like this magically make me start recommending him? No, it wouldn't. Would the Azir changes? I mean, I'm not recommending Azir in the first place, right? And Azir getting reworked to his W, and having actually a more complex laning phase now because he doesn't have access to the Q poke and the Q spam that he once did, is less likely to make me recommend Graves. Azir. Graves, the champion here, is this suddenly going to make Graves appear on the tier lists? No, it's not. This is not going to affect Graves' standing, even if he was currently existing on the tier list. This is not a sizable enough change. Callista, again, it's not a sizable enough change. Katarina, I mean, she's basically never going to be a champion that I recommend. And then Kha'Zix, the Kha'Zix change ended up actually being a nerf. I think in most cases, right? I think a lot of the Kha'Zix mains were pretty outspoken about that, and then 13.80 ended up getting a buff. But again, one of the main things about the list is, one, condensing it to a couple of champions. You guys have watched my streams over the last couple of years, etc. I always recommend a very small pool of champions for each role, and sometimes that pool of champions does change over the years for sure, especially like when reworks happen or something like that to certain champions. But for the most part, there's not actually enough going on inside of Riot patches to move a lot of the champions and their placements on the tier list. If you are a platinum and below player, a lot of the champions that you see in top lane and in mid lane, they're extremely easy to pilot. They have very easy CSing. They scale really well. If you actually look at EDU content that surrounds them, they're just very good champions, right? You can do a lot with these champions, and they also have pretty good fundamentals surrounding the game. Now, some of them can be like pretty unique. Like I would say like Aurelion Soul is definitely a unique champion, right? If we're looking at like this, like Alawi with her tentacles could definitely be like a unique thing, etc. But then as you look at some of the other champions that exist, or like the absence of some champions, this is the one that always stands out when I get messages on Patreon, or when people will write comments sometimes below the post and they'll be like, oh, where's Nami? Where's this champion? Where's that champion, etc. Either one, I just don't think that you should be playing the champion, or two, I think the champion sucks. And sometimes I get messages from people that are mains of a particular champion, and then they're curious why the champion's absent from the list. And I almost feel like it's ironic at that point, right? If you message me and you're gold or you're platinum and you have hundreds of games and you've only played this champion for several years, yeah, you shouldn't be playing it, and you shouldn't be looking for confirmation that it's a good champion or something because it's on one of this lists. This is not a win rate tier list. This tier list is not based off of Mobalytics or Deep Lol or FOW or any of those types of things. But also win rate tier lists, I think, are fundamentally bad in the first place too, because what a lot of people will do is they'll just see the win rates of a champion and then think like, oh man, I should pick that champion, or I should just play this champion because it's one of the highest win rates or something on the patch. And it's like, no, that's not how that works. There's definitely a lot of skill ceiling to some champions, and there's a massive learning curve to some champions. And I in the same vein, some champions actually have a deceptively high win rate or deceptively low win rate, depending on how you look at it, because either people put so many games into the champion and it has a very low pick rate, or so many people play that champion and it has a very large skill curve, right? That can take time to get good at. So that's one of the things about champions' absences from the tier list. A lot of people always ask about items and builds. It's really difficult, but it is something that I want to do, and I'm looking to... I talked about this with Max, as me and Max are in the process of getting a coaching website up and running. I'm looking to basically do something with Max and another person to sort of do, like, not guides, but basically on the drafting website that I have, one of the ideas is that people will be able to select a champion, and much like how Riot has its recommended runes and items for certain champions, I would manually go through with Max and some others and make stuff like that for every champion. But it's very time-consuming to keep up with all of that, and then it's also very time-consuming to do it in the first place. Doing it for all 160 champions, etc. That is a lot of time. That's a lot of work, and already it's very difficult with all the co-streams and live views and time zones and naps that I have to do and everything like that. So that's why that hasn't happened. But generally, items and runes are just actually look up what either the one tricks are doing, or just look up the most popular things. Items and runes are not going to make or break you in most of the cases. Items and runes, when you guys see me, bitch about it on co-streams or live views and stuff like that, it's because those types of things can matter for the highest levels of play. And they definitely can matter, like in solo queue. It's not like it doesn't matter at all. It's just that there's so many more things that you could be focused on. Now, the other concern about it for pro play is because items and runes and the way that you select the items and runes shows a deeper insight into your fundamental thought process about the game and the way that you're looking at things and prioritizing things. So that also is why I hone in so hard on items and runes that pro players select, because it gives you sort of insight into their subconscious in a way of like what they're doing when they load in, or the absence of it, right? So it works, no matter what. So anyways, going over some of the other champions. So MF and Karthus are basically the bread and butter of every single MMR. If you're an ADC player in bot lane, you guys might have seen even Tyler1 is doing this phenomenal climb right now on EUS using Karthus. Elo Santa, probably the best bot lane Karthus player in the world. There's a lot of people that play bot lane Karthus. There's more than enough information out there to do it. MF, really simple AD carry. She's been on my lists for years at the highest ranks. Now, in the past, there was some other marksmen that definitely were higher up, right? I think at various points there was like Lucian, at some points there was Varus, which Varus is here, but I wouldn't say that they're like the bread and butter of things that people should be playing. Lesser common things, I've actually debated on moving Soraka just out and putting Seraphine back in, because I think Seraphine's here, but what I mean is, like, I debated moving Soraka just out entirely, because I think, like, the Rod of Ages bot lane Seraphine is probably just better at that point, but I'm not convinced 100% on it. So I mean, that's for some of the uncommon picks, right? There's some uncommon picks as we you move up the ladder bracket and whatnot, but for the most part, I think a lot of things are still pretty solid. Obviously, the super high MMR has some specific champions that you just won't see in other MMRs, and it's because it's not for regular. I want to say, like, regular players, but I mean, that's how it is, right? Because once you get to, like, Grandmaster Challenger, you're talking about mostly amateurs, academy, semi-professionals, professionals, etc., right? So it's not your day-to-day people that are making up the mass majority of the ladder database. So that's what's going on there. I'm trying to think of, like, other questions that people had about specific champions. And I guess, like, none are really coming to mind immediately off the top of my head. I think, like, Udyr is sort of self-explanatory. Warwick is very self-explanatory. He's been in the list for actually a long time now. I think one of the things that people have asked about is, like, the god tiers. So obviously I did add Lucian Milio. If you also saw the Clash tier list, Lucian Milio is probably the most broken combo in the entire game right now. It's Nami Lucian on steroids. It's very difficult to lose lane with Lucian Milio. It is disgustingly broken in terms of power. However, it really does come down to the Lucian player in some ways. If the Lucian player doesn't have good damage foresight and just is not great at doing any animation cancels, is not great at weaving in the max range abilities and everything like that, and making use of Milio passive, you're going to have a bad time. But it is absolutely broken. And likewise, all of the Senna combos are extremely broken if you can actually get them. Now, obviously, what's going on here is, if you're a Senna player, you could, ask the support player or something to play, like, Seraphine or Sona, right? That would be something that you could do. I acknowledge that it's most likely, with the exception of Lucian Milio, only going to be found for duos, and I think that's totally fine. But I think the god tier thing is actually accurate. I actually considered just putting a best in the game tier specifically for this patch with Lucian Milio, because that is exactly what that champion combination is. But anyways, moving forward, the tier list. So 13.8 had, like, no changes pretty much whatsoever. And I do feel bad. And, you look at patch 13.8, let me pull it up really quick. We look at patch 13.8, and this is the stuff that makes me feel bad, because I feel like people are expecting something to happen on the tier list, and it just can't. So Aurelion Sol, he did get nerfed a little bit. His laning actually is harder, and Aurelion Sol has gotten some hits over the patches. So I did move him down on my recommendation by 1 everywhere that he was found. And I mean, I'm totally fine with that. Garen, it would not change his placement. I mean, Garen's already correctly placed everywhere that he's going to be. You're not going to get any changes here. Janna, she's already correctly placed everywhere. So just because she gets a little bit of a damage increase and she's more forgiving at lower MMRs, wouldn't change anything. Jarvan loses some damage. And yeah, sure, he definitely he loses some damage, and I think that's totally fine. I think that Jarvan is very unique in the current the current picture of things and whatnot, but I do think that there's only certain MMRs that really should be utilizing Jarvan, and I'm not going to recommend top lane Jarvan just because it doesn't make any sense to recommend top lane Jarvan, which is a specific thing versus, like, Jason Kennen, right? Kayn, Kha'Zix, taste their fear. I'm not suddenly going to start recommending Kha'Zix just because he gets a 10 damage buff on Q, because it doesn't have anything to do with the recommendation of a champion. Think about the amount of times that you actually lethal someone. Post armor, right? So this isn't just 10. The 10 has to go through their resistances first, right? Think about the amount of times that you actually lethal someone for this amount. Think about how many games you need to play for that to actually have an outcome. And I understand in solo queue it's a lot more plentiful, but is it going to make me recommend it to people who find the patron tier list and want to know what my suggestions are for you to play to simultaneously get better and win, and what are the best things that you could be playing, no, I'm not going to recommend Kha'Zix. Kog'Maw has been on the lists over the years. He's bounced around. He's appeared and he's disappeared, etc. This type of a change, it's mostly for dying, which, funnily enough, would probably be better for solo queue. But no, because people are not casting Q off of cooldown, so his placement wouldn't have moved. And then E Voidooz is more for like AP Kog'Maw than it is for AD Kog'Maw. And then all the other changes that we get here. Malphite, he loses some damage on his trade, but Malphite was there even before all of the buffs that he got, so it's just not moving. Poppy was probably the most noticeable, actually, of like the buffs that ended up happening in 13.8. And then, you get the Cosmic Drive change. The Cosmic Drive change is definitely good. So this is what's going on with the patches. Now, 13.9, I'm about to stream in a little bit, and I'll look at like the preview and stuff. But I think it's getting very noticeable that these tiers, these patch notes are coming out, and they're not having anything of substance. And I don't know what to do. And when I get the messages from people that are like angry about a tier list not having any changes, well, first off, I also do want to say I think it's crazy. I remember a conversation that I had with one person on Patreon that said that I really should just reskin the background and post the tier list. And it's like, what is the point of, like, I can't, I don't know if it's my autism or what, I can't logically understand that. I do not know why anyone would want me to change this blue to red and then just post the same exact image. Like, I can't wrap my head around it. I really don't, if there's no changes to the list. So this got me thinking, what can I do going forward if Riot is going to keep having patches like these where I just actually can't alter anything on the list. I can't make changes. And I hope that once Tuv gets here, can come up with more things to do. Obviously, Joe moved out. And so that's what's going on there. Yeah. So anyways, I just wanted this video to basically answer a lot of the questions about the tier list, the formation of it, some of the weirder champions, the god tier, the pairings that you see at the very top, and why changes don't happen to it. I didn't want this to be like the last time that I did, where I just went champion by champion and like talked about various different things, because there's so many champions on the list, right? The whole video would take so long, right? If I went into explanation for every single champion. So I just try to talk about some of the more obscure ones that aren't super common. And again, I repeat, there is plenty of EDU content on so many of these champions. There are Warwick Top streamers that even in the Chinese server, right? There's Warwick Top streamers, right? Karthus, Elo Santa is probably the best resource to watch for that. Tyler 1, if you're watching like the Tyler 1 climb right now going on in EU West, etc., that's really good. Lucian Milio is really good to play with like your duo and whatnot. Tryndamere, Nemesis, I don't know if he actually plays him right now. But I mean, there's that. Rumble, once you start getting into higher Mars, is absolutely disgusting. I would probably actually have Rumble added to top lane as well. In fact, I mean, I could move Rumble to top lane for sure right now, just because it's so difficult to actually beat him. But again, it's like one of those recommended things, and Rumble, I think, serves better in mid for solo queue. But I do think that Rumble is nuts. I think that Rumble as a competitive champion is absolutely bonkers for like pro play and whatnot. Stuff of that nature, right? Think like Scion is really good. The much higher MMRs, right? Or even Aurelion Soul and like top lane and stuff is really good to play. I think this is pretty good. Some people might wonder, like, there was the EU West Master E player, right, that got rank 1, and now he's playing on an A, and my list obviously has Master E absent. Master E has an enormous skill ceiling, and I think a lot of people don't see him that way because he just right clicks and then he presses Q, right? He doesn't really have a lot, but what they don't see is the queue timings. They don't see the patience to wait inside of team fights for all the CC to be blown and then go in. The W, the W attack reset, knowing when to do all of that. There's a lot of stuff that actually goes into Master Yi to make him very good. And so that's why I don't recommend him. Doesn't mean that I don't acknowledge that Master Yi can be a good champion. But again, I'm not going to recommend him when there's so many other champions. This is like when people come to my stream and they ask me what they should play, and I always say it depends on MMR. Really, like what you're going to be playing, and that is just the case. It does depend on MMR because champions change, I think, depending on MMR because of the baseline assumption of what players at that MMR bracket are likely capable of. I think that's pretty much it. So I hope that you enjoyed this explanation. It was sort of podcasty, but I hope it's sufficient. And then hopefully 13.9 will have more changes. And then Tuv also gets here he gets here May 2nd. And then we'll probably have another post with Tuv at some point, and then we'll go from there. So that's it. Guys, bye-bye.